There are moments in life so small they barely register when they happen. No thunder, no warning, just a quiet second that passes like any other. And yet, years later, you realize that was the moment everything changed. This story begins on a cold evening in Chicago, inside a restaurant where silence cost more than most people earned in a month. Robert Wellington sat alone at his usual table, not by preference, by habit. The table was always the same, near the window, slightly away from the noise. The kind of place where no one accidentally bumped into you and no one asked personal questions. The waiter didn't need to ask what he wanted. He never did. Robert ordered the same meal every time, not because he enjoyed it, but because it required no thought. Thought led to memory, memory led to pain, and pain was something he had learned to keep carefully locked away. Around him, the restaurant moved at an unhurried pace. Silverware clinked softly against porcelain. Low voices murmured behind polite smiles. A piano played something slow and tasteful, the kind of music meant to be heard without being listened to. This was a place where problems waited outside. Robert liked that, or at least he used to. At 62, Robert Wellington had what most people spent their entire lives chasing. Money that no longer felt like money. Buildings with his name engraved into stone. An influence that followed him into rooms before he arrived. People spoke to him carefully, respectfully, sometimes nervously. But none of that mattered when the night ended. Because every evening, without exception, he returned to an empty penthouse. No voices, no laughter, no reason to hurry home, just silence. 15 years earlier, Robert had been a different man. Back then, his schedule mattered, his time mattered, everything mattered because someone was always waiting for him. A wife who teased him for working too much, a daughter who counted the minutes until he came home. He used to rush through meetings just to hear her footsteps running down the hallway. He used to believe life was permanent. Then one night, a drunk driver erased his world in seconds. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and panic. Robert remembered standing in the hallway, staring at a wall he couldn't focus on, listening to machines beep in patterns that felt cruelly calm. Doctors spoke in careful sentences, nurses avoided his eyes. And then came the words that permanently changed the shape of his life. "I'm sorry." 2 people gone. 1 man left behind. Grief didn't arrive loudly, it arrived politely. It let Robert continue breathing, continue working, continue functioning. But it took something with it. Joy, urgency, connection. He didn't stop living, he stopped feeling, and over time, that became his survival. So here he was now, 15 years later, sitting in a restaurant where nothing personal was allowed to exist. His food arrived, steaming gently in front of him. He barely touched it. He wasn't hungry, he rarely was. That was when he heard the voice. "Sir, excuse me." It was soft, careful, almost apologetic. Robert didn't look up right away. People interrupted him often, usually with requests, sometimes with praise, always with expectations. He waited, hoping the voice would disappear. It didn't. "Sir, may I have what you're not going to eat?" Something about the question was different. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't demanding. It wasn't desperate in the way he expected desperation to sound. It was measured, as if the person asking had already accepted the possibility of rejection. Robert's hand froze mid-movement. Slowly he looked up. Standing beside his table was a young woman holding a baby. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her coat was thin, too thin for the weather. Her shoes were worn at the edges like they had been repaired more times than replaced, but her posture was straight, protective. The baby slept against her chest, wrapped carefully in a blanket that had once been blue. Robert noticed her hands. They were steady. That struck him. She didn't look around the restaurant. She didn't scan the room for sympathy. She was watching him, not with expectation, with calculation, as if she had already decided what she would do if he said no. Robert became suddenly aware of the room, the quiet tension, the pause in conversation at nearby tables, the way people pretended not to notice while noticing everything. This was not supposed to happen here. People like her didn't belong in places like this. And yet she stood there anyway. For a brief moment, Robert felt irritation, not at her, at the situation. at the intrusion into the carefully controlled numbness he had built his life around. He could have said no. A simple shake of the head, a gesture for security. He had done it before. But something stopped him. The baby shifted slightly in her arms, just enough to reveal a small face, peaceful, unaware, trusting. Robert's chest tightened. He had seen that expression before, years ago. In a crib he had once leaned over every night. Without speaking, Robert slid his untouched plate forward. He didn't announce it. He didn't make eye contact. He simply moved the food closer to her. The woman blinked. Once, twice. Then she nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a silent agreement. She didn't rush. She didn't grab the plate and run. Instead, she did something that would stay with Robert for the rest of his life. She knelt. Right there. On the polished restaurant floor, she placed the plate carefully on a folded napkin, then gently shifted the baby in her arms. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She broke the food into smaller pieces, blew on it softly, tested the temperature. Then she fed her child first. The world narrowed. Robert no longer heard the piano, no longer noticed the people around him. He watched the way she focused entirely on the baby, as if nothing else existed. Not embarrassment, not hunger, not the stares, only care. She smiled when the baby stirred, a small, tired smile, the kind that comes from love, not happiness. Robert felt something crack deep inside his chest, not loudly, quietly. The way she fed her son was painfully familiar, the same gentle pace, the same instinctive patience. It was exactly how his wife used to feed their daughter. The memory hit him without warning. A kitchen filled with late afternoon light, a child laughing when mashed potatoes landed everywhere except her mouth, his wife pretending to scold, failing miserably. Robert's breath caught. He hadn't allowed himself to remember that moment in years. Grief surged, not the dull ache he had learned to live with, but the sharp, living pain of something remembered too clearly. His throat tightened, his eyes burned. For 15 years he had avoided feeling this, and now it was unavoidable. The woman finished feeding the baby, cleaned the plate carefully, and stood. She looked at Robert again. "Thank you," she said quietly. No speeches, no guilt, just gratitude. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Robert didn't stop her. He couldn't. He sat there, unmoving, long after she disappeared into the cold night. The plate in front of him was empty. But something inside him was no longer numb. For the first time in 15 years, Robert Wellington felt alive, and that terrified him. Robert Wellington remained seated long after the woman left the restaurant. The waiter returned once, quietly asking if he would like dessert. Robert shook his head without looking up. The plate in front of him was empty, but his hands still rested on the table, unmoving, as if something invisible were holding them there. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm. Conversations resumed, laughter softened. The piano found its way back into the background. But Robert felt out of place now, as if something had shifted and left him exposed. He paid the bill and stood. For a moment he considered asking where she had gone. The thought embarrassed him. Instead, he walked out into the night alone. Chicago was colder than it had been earlier. The wind moved between buildings with purpose, cutting through coats and forcing people to walk faster. Robert welcomed the sting. It gave him something to focus on, something physical. In the back seat of his car, the silence pressed in. Normally, this was where he felt most comfortable, alone, untouched, unbothered. Tonight, it felt unbearable. His mind replayed the scene in fragments. The way she stood before asking, the careful wording of her question, the steadiness of her hands. Most of all, the way she fed her child. He arrived at his penthouse and didn't turn on the lights. The city glowed outside the windows, distant and indifferent. Robert poured himself a drink. The glass trembled slightly in his hand. He noticed. That unsettled him more than anything else. Where did she go after leaving the restaurant? The question arrived quietly, then refused to leave. He tried to dismiss it. Chicago was full of people like her, he told himself. He had given before, donated more money than he could track. Written checks that funded entire buildings. But this wasn't about money. That realization made him uncomfortable. He walked through the apartment. The rooms were large, clean, untouched, furniture chosen for elegance, not warmth. Nothing here suggested someone lived a life, only that someone occupied space. Robert stopped in front of a framed photograph he hadn't looked at in years. His daughter stood in the center, missing one front tooth, grinning like the world belonged to her. He had kept the photo face down for a long time. Tonight he turned it back. His chest tightened. That night sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it brought memories instead of rest. Morning arrived grey and quiet. Robert cancelled his meetings without explanation. No one questioned him. They rarely did. He put on his coat and walked outside. No driver, no destination, just movement. The city looked different on foot, less polished, more honest. He passed shelters with doors already open, church steps where people sat wrapped in blankets, corners where life continued without permission, faces blurred together, some hard, some hopeful, some resigned. He wondered how many stories he had never seen because he had been moving too fast. Days passed. Robert found himself returning to the same area near the restaurant. At first, he told himself it was coincidence. By the third day, he stopped pretending. That was when he saw her again. She sat on a park bench beneath a bare tree. The baby rested against her chest, wrapped tightly. In her hands was a thick book. Not a paperback, not something meant for distraction. A textbook. Robert slowed his steps. She read in short bursts. One paragraph. Then her eyes returned to the baby. A small adjustment of the blanket. A quiet hum. Then back to the page. Her focus never stayed away from her child for long. Robert watched from a distance. This was not someone waiting to be saved. This was someone fighting with limited tools. The book slipped slightly in her hands. She caught it instinctively. Robert caught a glimpse of the cover. Finance. He frowned. That didn't fit the picture he had constructed in his mind. She stood after a while and began to walk. Robert hesitated, then followed. Not closely, not obviously. He told himself he just wanted to understand. The scenery changed gradually. Green spaces gave way to concrete. Families disappeared. Warehouses replaced cafes. She didn't look back. She walked with purpose. Finally, she stopped beside an old sedan parked near an abandoned lot. The car was faded, one tail light cracked. A blanket hung across the back window for privacy. She unlocked the door and climbed inside. Robert stopped short. From where he stood, he could see her moving carefully inside the vehicle, adjusting the baby, rearranging belongings with practiced precision. The car wasn't temporary, it was home. She pulled out a small container. Leftovers. Robert recognized the shape. His stomach tightened. She ate a few bites herself, then stopped, saved the rest. The baby stirred. She began to sing softly, not loudly enough to carry, just enough to soothe. The sound drifted faintly through the open window. Robert felt something inside him shift. This wasn't a moment. This was a life. He turned away before she could see him. His steps felt heavier now, slower. Each one carried a weight he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility. That night, standing again in his penthouse, the city felt different. Smaller, closer, less abstract. He realized something that unsettled him deeply. He didn't want to forget her. He wanted to know her. And that meant stepping back into a world he had spent 15 years avoiding. Robert made a decision before fear could talk him out of it. The next morning, he would find out who she was. Not to control her, not to pity her, but to understand how someone like her ended up living in a car with a baby. He didn't yet know that the truth would force him to confront more than injustice. It would force him to confront himself. Robert slept very little that night. When morning came, it felt heavy, as if the air itself carried weight. He sat at the edge of his bed for a long time before standing, his hands resting on his knees, his thoughts scattered and restless. For 15 years, he had avoided asking questions that didn't have clean answers. Now, questions were all he had. He made one phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a board member, not to anyone who knew him as a public figure. He called someone who dealt in facts. "I need information," Robert said calmly. "But I don't want intimidation. I don't want pressure. I want the truth." The man on the other end didn't ask questions. People rarely did when Robert spoke that way. While the investigation began, Robert found himself replaying the same images again and again. The textbook, the car, the way she saved food. Nothing about her matched the story he had assumed. That unsettled him. 3 days later, a thin folder arrived at his office. Robert didn't open it immediately. He stared at it instead. There was a time when opening a folder like this would have felt routine. Now it felt personal. Her name was Jasmine Turner. 26 years old, graduated near the top of her class from a respected university. Double major. Internships that should have led anywhere she wanted to go. Robert read slowly, very slowly. She had been hired by a financial firm less than a year out of college. Her performance reviews were exceptional, analytical, reliable, trusted. Then, 6 months later, her file changed tone. Words like unprofessional appeared. Then inconsistent, then breach of trust. Robert frowned. None of it aligned with the earlier evaluations. The truth revealed itself in fragments. Jasmine had trusted someone senior, someone respected, someone untouchable. When she became pregnant and refused to quietly disappear, the consequences came swiftly. Meetings without records, accusations without evidence, whispers that became official statements. She lost her job, then her references, then her credibility. In her field, that was enough to end everything. Robert closed the folder and leaned back. This wasn't failure, this was erasure. He felt anger rise, not loud, cold, focused. He recognized it. It was the same anger he had felt years ago in a hospital hallway when no explanation could bring his family back. Robert waited to approach her. He didn't want to ambush her. When he finally saw her again in the park, she noticed him immediately. Her posture changed, protective, alert. She recognized him. "You followed me," she said quietly. "Yes," Robert replied, "and I'm sorry." She didn't respond. She waited. "I'm not here to judge you," he continued, "and I'm not here to embarrass you." She studied him carefully. People like her learned to read intention quickly. "What do you want?" she asked. Robert hesitated. That was the hardest question. "I want to help," he said finally, "if you'll let me." She almost laughed. "Help always costs something," she replied. He nodded. "I know." He didn't offer money. He didn't make promises. He told her what he knew. About her career. About what had been done to her. For the first time, someone spoke the truth out loud. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes did. She looked away, holding her baby closer. "They said I was careless," she said quietly. "They said I couldn't be trusted." Robert shook his head. They were wrong. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, heavy. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't need saving," she said. "I just need time." Robert nodded. "I can offer that." 3 nights later, his phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. He answered immediately. Her voice was breaking. "My baby is burning up," she said. "He won't stop crying. I don't know what to do." Robert didn't ask questions. "Stay where you are," he said. "I'm coming." He drove faster than he had in years. Traffic lights blurred, memories crowded in. Another night, another hospital, another helpless wait. The emergency room was bright and unforgiving. Doctors moved quickly. Jasmine stood frozen, her hands shaking. Robert stood beside her, saying nothing. Being present was enough. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, a doctor approached. "He's stable," she said. "We caught it in time." Jasmine collapsed into a chair, sobbing silently. Robert closed his eyes. This time, the story did not end in loss. As he watched Jasmine hold her child, relief replacing terror, Robert felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Careful. Fragile. But real. He understood now. Walking away was no longer an option. Whatever this became, it had already changed him. Morning arrived slowly. Hospital light filtered through thin curtains, pale and careful, as if even the sun did not want to disturb the fragile calm that had settled overnight. The baby slept. His breathing was steady now, deep and unbroken. Jasmine sat beside the crib, her hand resting gently on his chest, counting each rise and fall as if afraid the moment might vanish if she stopped paying attention. Robert stood a few steps behind her. He did not speak. He remembered too well how words felt unnecessary in places like this. When the doctor returned, she spoke calmly. "He'll need rest," she said. "But he's strong. You did the right thing bringing him in when you did." Jasmine nodded. Tears slid down her face without sound. They were not tears of fear anymore. They were tears of release. Later that morning, they sat across from each other in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria. Paper cups of coffee sat untouched between them. Robert spoke first, carefully. "I'm not offering charity," he said, "and I'm not asking you to owe me anything." Jasmine watched him closely. People had made offers before. They always came with expectations. "I'm offering stability," Robert continued. "A loan, clear terms, paperwork, time." She frowned slightly. "I pay it back," she said. "Every dollar." Robert nodded. "I wouldn't accept anything else." The apartment was modest. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a window that let in afternoon light. But it was warm, quiet, safe. That first night, Jasmine placed her baby in the crib and stood watching him sleep, afraid to lie down herself. She checked the locks. Once, twice, 3 times. Only then did she allow herself to sit, and for the first time in months, she slept without listening for footsteps outside a car door. Stability did not fix everything, but it changed what was possible. With a permanent address, Jasmine applied again, and again. Rejections came quickly at first, then interviews, then silence, then one offer. She read the email 3 times before believing it was real. At work, she arrived early, stayed late, not out of fear, but clarity. She knew exactly what she was working toward now, not ambition, security. Robert kept his distance. He did not hover. He did not intrude. Support, he had learned, was most powerful when it respected space. They spoke occasionally. Updates, nothing more. Trust, after all, was something that had to grow slowly. Months passed, then years. The baby became a toddler. The toddler became a child who laughed easily and slept deeply. A child who did not remember cold nights or empty plates. That was the quiet victory. Robert found himself present in ways he had never planned. School events, birthday cakes, afternoons at the park. The boy called him Grandpa one day without asking permission. Robert did not correct him. He did not need to. Grief never disappeared. But it changed shape. It no longer consumed. It coexisted. Love had found somewhere new to live. The foundation began quietly, not with announcements, not with press. Just help. One mother, then another. Childcare, temporary housing, time. Jasmine led it, not as a symbol, but as proof. She never forgot what it felt like to be unseen. Years later, Robert stood in a lecture hall. Students listened as he spoke, not about wealth, about attention. "I didn't save her," he said calmly. "I just stopped looking away." In the back row, Jasmine sat beside her son, safe, fed, loved. That evening they stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Lights stretched endlessly below. Jasmine spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no?" Robert nodded. "Yes," he said, "and I'm grateful I didn't." Inside, a child laughed. The city hummed. Life continued. Not perfectly, but honestly. Sometimes change doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly. In a moment of recognition, in a simple choice, and sometimes that is enough to change everything.